Hey everyone, welcome to the Creek. My name is Jared Miller. I'm the ministry lead here, and I'm joined in today's Creek conversation by a friend of mine named Mikhail. Mikhail is the CTO, the Chief Technology Officer for Paladin AI based out of Montreal. And I'm really excited to have him on the call today as we kind of dig into the reality of living in a world that is entirely digital and entirely personal at the same time. So Mikhail, welcome to the Creek. Thank you so much for being here today.
Oh, well, I'm happy to help out a friend.
Awesome. So can you give us a rundown? What does it mean to be the CTO for an AI company? What is Paladin AI and what does it mean to be the CTO?
Sure. So at Paladin AI, we build learning products specifically for aviation. So, training to become a pilot is a super complex task. A pilot will spend years getting the number of hours that they need, flying a lot in simulators, flying in small training aircraft before they can finally get to, flying for, a major airline. So along that journey, which is complex, costly, we're trying to use AI and data to make that journey more adaptive, more personalized, have an adaptive learning experience, if you will. Similarly, like all of the airlines that are flying today, like those pilots, they need to keep current. So they get their proficiency checks done every year, which means taking time off and traveling to a training center and doing, flights in a simulator with an instructor and having them recertify you for another year. That's a cost that the airlines bear. So if we can make that a little bit better, a little bit more personalized, that is a huge benefit to their own learning and to creates cost savings then for the airlines as well. The broader picture, of course, is that adaptive learning is potentially quite valuable across many domains. There's a lot of companies that are working in education, trying to make children who are learning on computers. It's particularly relevant right now. Have them come across exercises or learning materials that are right at their level, not too difficult, not too easy, something that captures their attention and helps them to learn at a pace that's right for them. The algorithms that are used behind the scenes in that type of technology, we're leveraging a lot of the same type of technology on our end, except we have the challenge of connecting to flight simulators and processing, a lot of, real-time pilot data. That's sort of where a lot of the AI components come in. So AI shouldn't be something that people find very scary. AI is really like pattern matching technology, at least today. That's where most of it is. Taking very complex data, could be very high dimensional or lots of different parameters to worry about, and then mapping that to a prediction. And that can be a prediction like, is the person who is expressing this review for a movie expressing a positive or a negative affect, right? That's right. A language application. Anyway, so we're trying to use AI to predict what is the true skill level and competency of the individual who's trying to learn something new.
So yeah, that's really cool, because this is definitely one of the coolest conversations I've gotten to have in this kind of context. But we try to hear at the Creek, think about how does our faith and our life impact, play out on a kind of a day-to-day basis. And we all know that every time we pick up a phone, every time we ask Google a question, every time we tell Alexa to play a certain kind of music, that we're kind of feeding into a reality that takes an artificial intelligence seriously, and it's not something we spend a lot of time thinking about, but I think it's something that kind of really impacts our world. And so I'm so glad that you're kind of here today to, I think, help us kind of bridge that gap between where we are and where we think we are, because I don't think those two things always match up. I don't think I definitely don't think about how often I interact with AI. And I was telling you before the call started that I was doing some research on mattresses for my daughter, and And now every time I go onto YouTube, it shows me an ad for some kind of mattress. And so I think that we live in this world that really does engage artificial intelligence with everyday intelligence, and I think it's a perfect metaphor for where we are in this sort of COVID time.
Mm.
And so I just wanted to get your take on like technology and kind of life in this distributed way. What would you say is kind of this is a question I'm just kind of thinking off the top of my head, but are there ways that you see technology kind of in not sneaking into life, but kind of playing into our everyday reality that we don't necessarily think enough about, or we don't talk enough about? Or I guess to put it another way, is there, as somebody who sort of lives as a technologist, do those of us who live outside of the technology world have blind spots that we should be more aware of?
Definitely. I mean, like, if I were a security researcher, I would be telling you about how people are not creating passwords that are safe enough, or using password managers, or using multi-factor authentication. Like, those are areas where people tend to be unsophisticated, but the threats tend to be very sophisticated. And there's a gap there. There's something similar in AI. If you're not aware of the way that machine learning or AI is being used and how it is directing your attention, then something else has control over you. Like, social media can be a wonderful thing. It can be used to connect to people, to meet new people, to expand your perspectives, to engage in conversations. But behind all of that are algorithms that are trying to monopolize your attention. And they might be doing that in such a way that directs your attention towards things that are deliberately upsetting or inflammatory, or attract the most eyeballs. And so that's sort of where I have concern, where I think there needs to be more robust AI ethics to sort of perhaps put some safeguards in place that prevents social media from sort of bringing out the worst in our behavior, fostering positive conversation as opposed to a Twitter war, or like conflict. So that's an area where I think people could be a little bit more savvy. So like when you are scrolling Facebook and you are clicking like on various posts, or joining particular groups, that is being used to build a persona about you. And with that persona, other things can be shown to you that the algorithm knows you will be interested in. And as you visit other websites, any website that has a little, like this or share this on Facebook button, they seem innocuous, that's tracking you. So you're on this website, you're shopping for mattresses, there's a Facebook tracking pixel in there somewhere that knows that you're looking for mattresses. And then when your particular browser fingerprint goes back to the Facebook website or to Instagram, or any Facebook property, you're seeing ads for mattresses. And I think people are not aware that this is happening, or they're starting to be aware about this, and they think that Facebook is spying on them, but it's all just it's an algorithm behind the scenes.
It's I mean, one of my own fundamental kind of assumptions is I think people generally, and I've been guilty of this for a long time, we think that we're more rational than we are. Like we tend to, James Smith uses the language of we like to think of ourselves as brains on sticks. That I think therefore I am is kind of our wannabe mantra, but we're much more motivated by our hearts. And these algorithms seem to be really keen. Like once they understand who you are, they can paint you a picture of the good life that they can estimate to a relative degree of certainty. That here's a picture of what Jared wants. Here's a picture of what Jared's dream of reality is, and so we'll show him that. I was listening to a podcast the other day, and they were talking about the two hosts that both were scrolling through Netflix, and they both stumbled across a new Transformers series. And one said to the other, said, "Oh, I see. I thought I made the choice to watch that, but I'm just realizing now that Netflix totally made that choice for me." And I think it's really interesting to think about the way that our desires are really not our own. The things that we love and the things that we kind of cherish are so often kind of maybe not implanted into us, but kind of, you know, put there and shown in a really glossy light, and then of course we kind of gravitate towards those things. And so I kind of want to navigate toward this question of ethics, because it's something that I've been really interested in for a long time. It's my grad work is in, and so, but a lot of people would probably say that, you know, what possible ethical frame or what possible ethical advice can an ancient, 2,000, 4,000, 8,000 year old religious practice offer to technologists? Like, how do it's easy in those cases for secularity to just sort of take over and say we need to develop a whole new ethical framework. Is there a balancing act between those kind of pieces? Does an ancient religion have anything positive to say toward technological ethics? Can it say anything at all, even?
To answer your question, let's maybe back it up a little bit and talk about the topic of AI ethics. Bias is obviously a huge issue when it comes to AI ethics. I mean, we're writing these machine learning algorithms and then training them on data. So basically we have input data and a previous result that we're using as a target to try to predict. And let's say you're using an AI to give a famous example, like speed up sentencing. You have a backlog of court cases. You have maybe individuals who are awaiting sentencing, and you decide to use a machine learning algorithm to decide on that sentencing for you. When this was tried, the result was an algorithm that ended up handing out harsher sentences to people of color. And this is obviously an undesirable result. It's building unfairness, it's building bias into the system, but that's because the training data was biased. So a history of biased sentencing, if that's your training data, will result in an AI that hands out biased sentences. Similarly, there's a scandal in the UK right now where, on account of COVID and students not being able to do their final exams, grades are being determined by algorithm, and it's been very controversial. It's been kind of a disaster, again, because these biases that existed in the past are cropping up in the results, and that's undesirable, to say the least. So ethics can inform us when it comes to, like, how is it that we design these algorithms? What is the training data that we use? Do we need to reform this data first before we hand over our decision-making power to an AI? Do we have to have checks and balances so that even when an AI spits out a result, it doesn't just get followed, without any kind of human authority that's verifying that the result is in fact fair or unbiased? Our algorithms tend to be reflections of ourselves. That's probably true broadly of technology. The technology itself is neutral, but the way that it's used, it can either amplify our worst impulses, or perhaps we can codify some of our highest truths and have that reflected in our algorithms. So this is kind of where I think to your point about ancient wisdom playing a role, to take a step back and look at like what some historians call like the axial age. Are you familiar with this term?
I'm not, no.
It's not universally agreed upon, but there was this period in history, like between like the 8th century and the 3rd century BCE, where in different cultures around the world, you ended up with these religions springing up that espouse things like nonviolence, thinking of like Jainism, Taoism, Confucianism. In the Middle East, you had like the Hebrew minor prophets, and you have these wisdom traditions that are espousing an ethics that represent kind of a departure from the past. And to speak specifically to the Judeo-Christian tradition, it would be things like don't defraud your workers, welcome the alien, pay a fair wage, the forgiveness of debts, although maybe that's an older idea. But these ideas that you read about in the major and minor prophets sort of stem kind of from that time. And then, across the Mediterranean in ancient Greece, you have sort of Plato and Platonism, which then goes on to play a very large role influencing the evolution of Christianity in the Gentile world. There's this pivotal time in history where all these ideas are coming to the fore. And what caused that? What triggered that? I'm not a historian. Some argued that it's because there was a lot of trade between different civilizations. So different ideas are starting to come in contact with each other, or perhaps there were just large enough social upheavals within a society that scholars, prophets, wise people take a step back and say, how should we actually live? What are the laws that make for a good society? And maybe we're in a moment like that again today. Maybe with all of this accelerating change in technology, and with all of the I guess multiculturalism, pluralism. We're in Canada, it's a pluralistic society. We're faced with adopting a global view. We have no choice, right? We have to see ourselves as a global species and reckon with different cultures and ideas, and technology that in the wrong hands, it could do a lot of damage. It's extremely powerful. So maybe there is a role for some ancient wisdom to play there, just to temper our worst impulses, amplify the better angels of our nature.
That sort of that idea. There's an idea in Christian theology, this idea of imago Dei, the image of God, as kind of a central tenet of Christianity. This idea that people have a value, and to undercut that value is intrinsically wrong. And so I'm curious what role, like transformation, like the kind of radical transformation that so many people in Christian history have talked about. It hasn't been that hasn't been my experience. My experience has been transformation happens much more gradually and sort of step by step. You look back on yourself 5, 10, 15 years ago and you realize, hey, I'm a different person. I'm not sure when that happened, but it definitely has happened. And like, does AI ethics kind of account for that? Does it account for the fact that people change, or does AI ethics, or does AI even kind of, or maybe AI is neutral on it, but can an artificial intelligence of any kind take into account the fact that people change and people want to, or maybe don't, but I think people want to make radical changes in their life and often just feel stuck by their heart impulses. We don't change because Dan Heath and Chip Heath, the Harvard business guys say, it's like a guy riding an elephant. The elephant is your heart, and the rider is your head. And no matter, if your head tells the elephant to go one way, if the elephant wants to go another way, the elephant's going to win because the elephant just has a lot more power. And I think about this idea of people who want to change their life and people want to make some kind of a positive life change, and they find themselves trapped by, and that may be a pejorative word, but they find themselves trapped by the same things that they see over and over again. The algorithms feed them the same things. They see the same destructive life, they see the same group of people on Facebook or on Twitter, and their mind can never break out of this cycle that they know is self-destructive. They know it's probably not helpful to their relationships to have to only be hearing one kind of voice, but those are the only voices that they hear, and it becomes difficult to break out of that. Are there ways that more practically, we can sort of maneuver through those minefields, or is it like, how does a community kind of move together through minefield, I think, is the best analogy, but like this challenge of being the church in an age where we're constantly being inundated with what an algorithm of who we have been. My question probably not being clear, but we're constantly being shown images of who we have been, and so how do we make kind of more positive changes to move out of who we have been towards who we want to become? And maybe that's sort of beyond the scope of what you do, but I think it's
certainly.
I think it's such an interesting question. To me, it's sort of the fundamental question. An author that you and I have discussed before, but Noah Harari, says that AI is going to, every single industry on the planet is going to have to grapple with the reality of artificial intelligence at some point in the 21st century. And I've always kind of wondered what that's going to look like for churches. And then COVID hit, and all of a sudden, we realized that all the people we wanted to reach are already online, so we do have to grapple with this, but maybe not in the way that I thought he was talking about it. But this kind of this reality of living as online people, living as people who are have one foot in the physical world all the time, and are trying to be in the business of life transformation, but are constantly being shackled by the algorithm showing me who I used to be, who I the decisions I made before.
Yeah, I think I get where you're going with this. On certain social networks, I think particularly Facebook, there's this, you tend to see what's already in you have this echo chamber. And sometimes a social network will also try to just create just conflict, because conflict it pushes those emotional buttons in our brains that cause us to pay attention, and it's a tool for monopolizing your attention. Some people have responded to this by just opting out. I think following the scandal around Cambridge Analytica, leading up to the 2016 presidential election in the United States, when I log into Facebook now, a lot of my friends have just sort of checked out of the platform. It's a ghost town. Some are still active, but a lot of them, if they haven't closed their accounts, there's no activity. And I've largely done the same. Twitter, I'm starting to re-engage again. When I first used Twitter, I didn't really know that there was a right way and a wrong way to use it. I just signed up. I just started following everybody that I was remotely interested in. and pretty soon my feed was a total mess. And there's a lot of arguments that happen on Twitter. It sort of fuels a lot of rage. um, I ended up carefully curating who I follow on Twitter, and it's made reading Twitter a lot more engaging for me, a lot less toxic than it used to be. So there's what Harari talks about a lot throughout his books is the need to know yourself, right? Know thyself is sort of ancient wisdom. Take a step back and be mindful of the emotional buttons that these algorithms are pushing. Understand that they're vying for your attention, and you can make the choice not to grant them that. You can limit your exposure, or you can curate what you see to a degree, and then that makes for a better experience. I found myself, rather than messaging through these platforms quite as much, I will message people just directly. Group chats or just a direct phone call or text message is often more personal than posting something to somebody's wall on Facebook. Do people still do that?
I think so.
Kind of been off the platform for a little while.
It's Beth's birthday. I should probably post something on Beth's wall today. I think so. I mean, I kind of hear in that sort of it's a little maybe not shrouded, but kind of cloaked. Good news though is that the algorithm's never finished, right? Like that's kind of the hidden reality behind all of this is, yeah, the algorithm is going to show you, who you've been all along, but the more you make the intentional choices to curate, the people that you want to follow on Twitter, or the choosing to go to pages of the person that you want to become, the algorithm starts to learn that you're a person in process, and there might be a time coming where I won't see as many mattress ads anymore because the algorithm will listen that I've got. There are so many mattress ads. I had no how many people are creating mattress ads. It's wild. But the understand that the algorithm is never finished, I think is kind of a key learning for me. Maybe that's a big takeaway for today is that this
do you see yourself as an algorithm?
Oh, that's a big question. Do I see myself as can you define algorithm?
Maybe algorithm is not the right word, but I mean, you're talking about something that is continuously being fed with data about you, and is sort of updating and tuning its recommendations. But working on things like neural networks caused me to think a lot more about how human brains work, the neuroscience, and the plasticity of brains and how they change over time in response to different inputs and environments. And you're talking about people as a work in progress.
There's a great Richard Rohr quote. Richard Rohr, the spiritual author. He says, "People don't think ourselves into a new way of living. We live ourselves into a new way of thinking." And I've loved that quote. I'm not the biggest Richard Rohr fan, but I love that quote because I think it really gets to the way we change ourselves. It's not by it is much more gradual. And I mean, by that definition, I do think that we're algorithms. The brain is just a great big, pattern matching machine anyway. Our whole brain
is that something your parishioners want to hear?
Well, maybe not. But our brain has evolved to recognize patterns, and so we hear a rustling in the bush, and our brain has evolved to think tiger. Our whole evolution is sort of predicated on being able to recognize a face, and being able to sort of identify, you know, I ate that red berry last time and I got really sick, so I shouldn't eat that red berry this time. Like we learn by putting, you know, by, you know, information being put into us, and our sort of our cultural self has passed that information down from generation to generation to generation, and we've gotten significantly smarter as a group of people. And so, I mean, I don't think it's a far stretch to think of ourselves that way. Which, I mean, maybe that's sort of a leg into one of the more interesting questions that I sent you when I was thinking about this is, you know, has your relationship with AI affected the way you think about what it means to even really be alive? Like has, you know, you famously, you asked me one time, maybe not famously or infamously, but could you consider, at the most broad definition, a thermometer to be or a thermostat to be alive, because it reacts to stimulus, it fits many of the sort of the characteristics of life? And we had a wonderful conversation about that, and we don't need to rehash that now, because I think that's probably too nerdy and weird for most of the people who are going to watch this.
Well, I think it was in the context of consciousness, right? Mm-hmm. I think the two most interesting questions in the universe are, why is there something rather than nothing? Mm-hmm. And two, why is there consciousness? Mm-hmm. Right? Like, I could be an automaton. I could be a biological machine that knows how to eat and avoid predators and procreate, and that is my objective function, and I seek to maximize that to the greatest degree possible, and that's it. But yet, for some reason, I also have subjective experiences about what it is like to be alive, to be a human, and these qualia are different for different animals, presumably, and I don't know what it's like to be a dolphin, although I imagine it's awesome. But like, this is the weird thing, right? Like, I don't even know whether you're a conscious being, right? I could be hallucinating you, yeah. But I suspect that you're a conscious being, mm-hmm. based on our interaction, and seeing the way that you respond to humor or, you know, to pain. I'm led to believe that you have subjective experiences of reality. That's weird. It's weird that there are things in this universe made up of the atoms of this universe that collectively are not just processing information, but having subjective experiences of the universe. That's really cool. And then the next question is, as we get better and better about building intelligent machines, would we get to a point where we build a machine that has a subjective experience of reality? Is that an emergent property of matter? Is that a property of matter that is in a particular configuration? I mean, I think a lot of religious inclined people would talk about a soul there, but a soul is incredibly difficult to define. It's very frustrating. I don't posit a soul a priori, because it's how would you prove that? And so if there's something about this particular arrangement of biological matter that produces a consciousness, a subjective experience of reality, will there come a time when a machine has that same experience? Or what happens if it doesn't have that experience, but it's conditioned responses because of how we've programmed it and the way that it's learned from observing its environment, or perhaps observing us? It can give responses to us that are so compelling that we're led to believe that this thing has subjective experiences, right? Like, what were those annoying little robots that Furbies?
Oh, Furby. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, like people, like these are little robots essentially that emote, and people respond to that emoting with their own sort of emotional response. And it's a robot that's just designed to provoke that reaction from us. And we could potentially get a lot better than that. How will we have to afford rights to an intelligence that we build in a machine? Will it be murder to pull the plug or erase their hard drive?
I mean, evolutionarily speaking, that's not new per se. Like there's evidence that, a study that I read once upon a time, and maybe I'll try to put the link to it in the description below this video. During the domestication of cats, their act of, they developed the meow because cats in the wild don't meow. Domesticated cats meow. And so at some point they made the evolutionary leap to start meowing because it was advantageous, and at least a certain group of biologists are supposing that it's because it mimics a human cry. It creates an emotive response. And so we've let ourselves be manipulated into having little murder parasites running around the house. And so, I mean, it's not new per se. It's not novel anyway to think about machine doing that, because we've let non-conscious beings do that previously. And so it's not a novel concept to think about it from a machine standpoint. I think that the question about the soul is super fascinating, and it's well beyond. There are metaphysicists who, I know you're a real physicist, but there are metaphysicists who, by the way, Mikhail has a PhD in astrophysics. Yeah, so right. He is much more capable of going deep into this nerdy well than I am, and so I'd be very careful to stay in my very narrow sphere of things I know about. What was I saying? Oh yeah, the metaphysicist would have, I think, a lot more to say to that kind of question of the nature of the soul. And to me, the soul is kind of a boring question, because it's something that it sort of sits as a tenet of faith rather than, something that can be kind of grappled with or wrestled with or questioned. And so, I think the concept of life is much more interesting to me. And where do we draw that line between a machine being helpful and a machine being alive? And what are anybody who's been through grade 7 biology can tell you what the qualities of life are. I mean, maybe not off the top of their head, but, does it move? Does it reproduce? What are they? See, I can't remember them now.
Maintain homeostasis.
Yeah. Some form of, anyway, like this idea of life is kind of a messy one. And it's one that, I think ironically, the church is kind of uniquely positioned to grapple with, because the church has kind of always maintained that life is inherently messy. Like the theologians in the Middle Ages used the phrase the glory of mankind, to use non-inclusive language. The glory of mankind is to be fully alive. The glory, the experience of being really human is to be alive. I'm butchering the quote, but it's this idea that that there's life, but then there's real life, and the two are not the same thing. Just because you have a steering wheel doesn't mean you can drive, to paraphrase a lyricist. This idea of life is much more. It seems to be more of a moving target than we want to give it credit for.
If you're talking about like the divide between like this idea of just being like a living thing versus having a thriving, fulfilling, meaningful existence, is that the sort of dichotomy that you're talking about?
Yeah, like that. Not everything. Like a bug is alive. I don't think twice about stepping on an insect if it's or if there's a spider in the sink and Beth tells me to kill it, I don't lose sleep over it. But I don't make that same distinction for every animal that comes into my house. If there was a bird that flew into the house, I would make every conscious, reasonable effort I could to get it out without hurting it. And so I don't have a rational reason for that, except that I recognize that life is not always equal. That, you know, the life of a bug, while they're both technically, and a bird, while they're both technically alive, I care more about one than I do the other. I prioritize one over the other. I attribute value to one more than the other.
My concern would be that sometimes a religious dogma can bias you to thinking about human specialness inappropriately, right? You know, when science showed that the Earth revolved around the sun, it meant that we weren't the center of the universe anymore, and that was offensive to our human egos. Similarly, it's been very difficult in a protracted period of time for many religious folk to accept that, you know, life evolved on this planet, because it meant somehow that we were perhaps less special because we had a kinship with all the other animals. And so, you know, I worry a little bit about how that sort of insistence on specialness could, like, it already causes some people to devalue animals tremendously, like to deny that they have even sentience, right? Even that they can feel pain, right? That for a long time, people thought that, you know, no, the animal is just giving a conditioned response. It's just instinct, right? No, it's actually feeling pain when you know, prod it or expose it to high temperature or whatever, you know, was done to torture these animals. And so I worry sometimes that, like, if we, let's say, created the Holy Grail is artificial general intelligence, right? To have a thinking machine. How would we treat that? And would that be an offense to our sense of specialness? Same thing if we uncovered, like, if you know, we made first contact and, you know, we discovered alien life and it was sentient and we somehow managed to communicate with it. What would, like, how would religious people respond to that? Would they welcome that reality? Would they deny that these people are have a common creator? I don't know.
Yeah, like that's a fascinating thought experiment, and you depending on what sort of stream of Christianity you ask, you get different questions. Like, you have the Catholic Church famously a couple years ago, you know, issuing a sort of a declaration that if intelligent life was found on another planet, that it would simply be a mission field for this. And there's all kinds of questions about original sin that go into that, and the dogmas around it. There are, you know, more fundamentalist streams have a you know, a very linear, you know, the Earth is only 6,000 years old because every single person has descended from a single family, and therefore, you know, others have a much more metaphorical read on it, and then there's the sort of the more esoteric question of, you know, how do we even, if we did meet truly alien life, would we even be able to recognize it as life? Because you know, we're conditioned to think about life as you know, we understand it. Life out there might look like an octopus, but it also might not. Like, if it's truly alien, we might not have a frame of reference for understanding, you know, it.
But I worry sometimes too about like whether we truly understand the experiences of other animals, right? An octopus has a very different nervous system compared to, you know, even mammals. Its nerves are distributed throughout its body. It has clusters of nerve cells in its arms. Its arms are almost independently solving problems that seem to be then, have a superintendent brain above them. So it's thinking with its entire body, which is a very different way of a very different variety of consciousness, if you will. It's almost like an alien life form.
Sure.
And we don't know what the experience of being an octopus is like. And my I guess what I'm saying is consciousness, wherever it appears, is extremely special. It seems to have its most elaborated and complex form in humans. And then, if humans were to create a consciousness in silico, if you will, and that consciousness came to match ours in its complexity and capacity for thought, how would we respond to that?
That is.
We're sort of going off
that's
very different tangent here, but
we touched on some of the questions that I sent you, but I that's what I love about chatting with you, is the conversation can just go, and we can. I always feel like I come away from a conversation with you being like, I have to go and sit alone by myself because I have to process. I have to process what Mikhail said. But yeah, like I think that's such an interesting question, and I mean, we should definitely have a cocktail and chat more about it. But I want to be conscious of your time and how busy you are, and thank you so much for being on today. If people have questions, I would love to see your questions in the comments. I will happily forward them on to Mikhail and see if we can get responses to anything he said. What do you think about the idea of life? What is life? What would you say is the definition of life? Put your answers in the comments. We would love to discuss and engage with them there. Mikhail, thank you so much for being here and for chatting with us. Take care of yourselves, and take care of yourself and as well, and your good wife and all the people that you get to interact with. It was great chatting with you.
I'm gonna get a lot of hate mail, right?
I'll screen all the hate mail for you. I love it.
All right. Hopefully you don't get too many downvotes on your channel.
We'll do our best.
Good luck.
All right. Thanks, Mikhail.